So, pre-recording. Thank you so much for doing us the honor of being here. Indeed, it's a double pleasure having Mr. Pleasance as well. We are a very small museum, but we have a lot of visitors, and we also have 3-hour workshop where schools can actually come and see the history of computers. And of course, today we're very pleased to have with us both of you. If I may start with something, we had an event 2 weeks ago, and a friend of ours, our age, 50 years old, brought his son. He showed him the Amiga and he said, "This is a PlayStation of our time." I said, not exactly. This is like somebody comes today where you have the PlayStation 5 and he brings you a PlayStation 8, not a renumbered PlayStation 6 into 8, but actually 3 generations ahead. He said, "You're kidding." I said, "No, I'm being modest. This is what the Amiga was all about." And even though I started with an Atari ST, my friend Nicola started with a Spectrum, it took us many years to really appreciate what the Amiga was. And to quote Mical from one of the books, "My God, what an incredible thing you did." So yeah,
it's true, isn't it? I'm stunned to this day. Not that we did it then. That I wonder if anyone could do something like that today. But that we had, you know, that the bald courage and confidence and bold belief in ourselves and in the mission that we just went off and invented a new computer. That still just stuns me to this day. I have an idea. Let's go make a new computer. Okay.
And not just a new computer. I mean, this is somewhere where we want to go. Initially, if we're not mistaken, it started as a project for a next generation game console, if I'm correct. It's something that Atari did not want to approve at first. Yeah. And you did not pull any stops. I mean, we've read several books about the Macintosh and the dream team that they had and how they developed the GUI, because the actual first Macintosh was mainly the graphic user interface and whatever was underneath that. But you went 100 steps further, and if I may,
well, it's so true. It's so funny. I think, you know, the circumstances of the fate that's involved in this story made the Amiga as powerful as it was, because it was indeed originally a game platform. It was supposed to be a screamingly good game system. And the vision was that by building a game system that had a real operating system, that finally developers would be able to create better games for the system, because they were able to work on a more sophisticated hardware and with a more sophisticated interface to the system. So even though it was a game system, it was designed to have the power of a multitasking operating system driving the game system. But still, it was a game system, and so it lacked, in the beginning, a lot of key features. Like, it didn't in the beginning have a keyboard. It didn't have external storage. It didn't have memory protection for applications that were running in a system. If it was a real computer, you'd expect a lot of these kinds of hardware features. But happily, the Amiga engineers had all along not only designed it to be a game system, but had left enough backdoor opportunity to be able to change it from being just a game system into a full multitasking computer system that could be used for business and other applications. Art, video, it turned out to be huge with the Amiga in the early days. But it all started because it was a game system that we wanted to be a full-on game system with a real operating system driving the thing. And we had all these extra capabilities that we could add later. Then later, the bottom dropped out of the game market, and suddenly no one wanted to buy games anymore. And the idea of selling the Amiga as a game system completely fell apart. We had ourselves a brand new piece of technology that we developed that was almost done, was almost ready to be shipped, but it was this awesome game system that just needed the final finishing touches on what it was going to look like, the packaging and stuff. But there was no market for it. There was suddenly absolutely no market for the Amiga game system. But we realized that there was an opportunity to turn it into a real computer that that it needed to be in order to be able to survive in the marketplace. And because Commodore was there and Commodore was wanting us to turn it into a proper computer, we were able to take the extra steps that were required to push it from the game system status that it had to being a full proper computer with everything that you would expect out of a real computer, that it was a real computer in the sense that it was not just a good game system, but it was also a good business system. It was a good video and graphical arts system, visual arts. There was a real proper computer, but for the common person, to fit in everyone's household, at everyone's budget sort of computer. That's what we were shooting for. But we were able to transition from it being a game system to it being a proper computer in the first place, because that's sort of how the hardware people and the software people that first designed the system, what they shot for, what they wanted it to be. So it, from the beginning, had a full multitasking operating system that had a device driver design built into it that allowed you to add hardware pieces. And we had a plan for adding a keyboard. We had a plan for adding external storage and stuff like that. We just hadn't executed on it because it was a game system, but all the building blocks were there already. So when we realized in desperation, oh my God, we can't sell a game system, this has to be a real computer, we were able to make the transition because all the pieces were there already. We already could add a keyboard. We just needed to hurry up, run out and get a keyboard and get it running and get it plugged into the system and stuff. But we did that. And a mouse, we could handle a mouse already. We were already handling a joystick. You could add a mouse just as easily to that same port and stuff like that. All the pieces were there already. We just had to make the transition. There was a couple of pieces that were totally missing. The user interface, most notably, I created the user interface for the Amiga to turn it into a proper business and home personal computer thing. It needed a user interface, and that was, it had to be completely created from scratch. But we were able to do stuff like that. There was other things that we couldn't do. In particular, the one that hurts my heart the most is a memory manager. The hardware memory manager, the lack of that in the early Amiga allowed the early Amiga to have programs, poorly written programs, crash not just themselves, but crash the whole computer. Ought to be the case, and it is the case today, that a badly written program crashes itself and it just dies. But in those days, it would bring down the entire Amiga, and that ended up hurting the acceptance of the Amiga by the world community, because it did crash a lot, the early versions of it, because any poorly written app could bring it down. But we knew it was a flaw, but there was nothing we could do about it. To add memory management was not just a change and I mean a basic and elemental change to the structure of the hardware itself, but would have required the entire operating system to be overhauled as well. And it was something we knew we should have, but that we gave up on, and the cost was dear. It cost us dearly to not have that sort of sophisticated computer capability in the original Amiga. Computers have them now. Everyone's memory managed now.
Yeah.
Even the 3DO that we made several years later, the decade later, was a memory managed system. Not quite a decade, 6-7 years, but we had learned our lesson. I often talk, I'm sorry, I'm talking a lot, but I often reflect on the difference between the 3DO that we did, 7-8 years later, and the Amiga, was that we were older, more sophisticated, more learned, and had been educated at the College of Hard Knocks by creating the Amiga computer, because we got a lot of stuff wrong with the Amiga. We did a lot of things right, but we Amiga engineers, hardware and software both, we got a lot of things wrong, and we learned a lot of lessons from developing that system. And many of us got together then many years later to do the 3DO. And the 3DO I always look at as the Amiga done right.
Okay.
The operating system is rock solid. The hardware is just gorgeously designed. It all fits together perfectly like a glove. It's just that 3DO was all of us having learned our lessons and having been in the industry for almost another decade, and then doing it again, getting a chance to do it together again. And we did a brilliant job of it. And I just love that system. But I will say that it's a much better engineered system, but I love the Amiga more because the Amiga was a work of art, a work of passion, a work of joy, friendship, people pulling a thing together, pushing a rock up a hill together and succeeding. And the Amiga meant more. The Amiga was more of an act from the heart for a lot of us, and I'm glad we got a second chance. But don't ever take that Amiga away from me.
But RJ, look at the legacy that you left behind.
Yeah.
I mean, the Amiga community now is stronger than it ever has been. It's growing and growing and growing. It's almost unbelievable. It's phenomenal.
It's unbelievable.
Yeah.
I just, the numbers just shock me. It's just, you guys, this is just so wonderful.
Yeah.
If I may, just for the younger generation, the Amiga had a preemptive multitasking graphic user interface from the get-go. It took the Macintosh 6 years to get cooperative multitasking. It took it 16 years to get preemptive multitasking with Mac OS X. It took with the next step, 8 years.
16 years.
To get there. It took Acorn another 8 years with Acorn OS, and of course an ARM processor. So this is, and Windows, of course, the first two versions sucked. they kinda got it right, and they got preemptive multitasking with version 3. So
I didn't like Windows until XP, to tell you the truth.
I didn't like it until Windows XP, actually.
Me too. XP is my first time I finally liked Windows.
But this is great. I mean, you get a machine that's got a graphic user interface that was developed 1 year after the Macintosh, and of course it's got color, it's got a preemptive multitasking operating system, and you see, wow.
Yeah,
And
furthermore, a little known statistic, the Amiga did much better in its first year than the Macintosh did in its first year. In every respect, sales, amount of software available, number of crashes of the machine in the first or in the early years and stuff like that. The Amiga outshone the Macintosh. And should have won, because as you just said, not only that, but it was in color. It was in color. It was awesome. And it was the best game system that money could buy in your home. It was the best.
yes.
I still to this day love to pull out my Amiga games and play them.
probably they had deeper pockets. I mean, there is a lot of discussion on why Apple kept persevering. Of course, we know that without desktop publishing, maybe the Mac would have sunk. And well, it's a huge debate. But I will quote Jean-Louis Gazet, which was one of the managers of the technology groups of Apple in a Byte magazine. I think that was in 1987, where he said, when we first saw the Amiga at Apple, we were really, really worried about it.
Gase was superb.
Yes.
I love that person.
Yeah, well, that was good.
But you know, there's a very, very good reason why Apple beat Amiga in the long term. And that is that as far as the US is concerned, Commodore sales division were what we call sales prevention officers. They did not do a good job of selling anywhere. That's what sales prevention officers. That's what they were. Terrible.
Jesus.
You consider what we did in Europe compared to what they did in the US, and that the US was the market that we needed to be the champions of in order to beat Apple and everybody else.
Yeah. Well, happily though, for me, I gotta say, there's two stories here. What was the Amiga, and why didn't the Amiga make it? And I can talk to why the Amiga didn't make it in terms of the what we did wrong in the operating system, what the hardware didn't do right from the beginning that we wish it had done differently and stuff. But sales, marketing, all of that stuff, that's not really my gig. I get to complain about it and say, oh, it didn't make it because of these things. And I think those factors are the real actual factors. I don't think the Amiga failed for technical reasons. I think technically
exactly 100% agree with that.
But all the rest of it, I get to, even though I flap my lips every once in a while, I really ought not, because I don't know. I'm notoriously bad at all of that stuff, sales and marketing. And so I get to blissfully instead say, oh, I didn't do it. We made a good machine. Somebody else did something. I don't know what.
Back in the late 80s, early 90s, there was a huge attrition war between Commodore and Atari. Atari, of course, with the Atari ST and Atari with Atari ST, and Commodore with the Amiga, and mainly the 500 models versus the 520 ST. So they were all the time butchering the prices. So how do you feel about this attrition war? Did it play a significant role in weakening Commodore?
I'm probably the best person to answer that, because I had a direct one-on-one war with the Atari ST. But to be honest with you, if we're going to have this interview in a month's time, it'd probably be better for me to leave it until then, because it's a very interesting story, and I'm certain that your audience will love it. But I don't think that's right for this meeting with RJ. His story is much more relevant to this.
Okay,
but I would take a stab at that. I myself would take a stab at that. If you would ask the question again, I'd like to try to answer it.
Okay. From what we believe is that Commodore, instead of focusing on marketing the Amiga for its strength, it was playing a price war with Atari. Maybe that hurt the R&D as well, and less money, less R&D spending, over focusing on games instead of the core strengths of the Amiga.
Now, that question is a question that David would better answer, and I'll leave that better answering to David during his meeting. But the part about price wars and how that affects the common people, I gotta say, that probably was my favorite part of that whole experience, that it did force us continue to think along the lines of who are we doing this for? Why are we really doing this? We weren't doing it to become rich. We were doing it to serve common people, to serve the everyday people, to serve the people that didn't have a lot of money, but would be wrong if we left them behind in the dust, as we all, the people that had the money could buy nice computers and learn about this whole big new wave that was coming at us called computers. Our mission was to put that power in the hands of everyday people. And so those wars that happened, those wars that led to the Amiga 500, yay! What an awesome thing that turned out to be. Because while I love the thing that we did, look what we managed to do after that, and how we were able to squeeze it into such a powerful machine that anyone could afford, even more than the first thing that we did. Gosh, I was so happy. All of it. I was so happy with all of it. So yes, and we'll let David answer the more businessy stuff of part of it. But in terms of missions and in terms of my heart, yay!
RJ, you are such a joy. You are such a joy. You're so refreshing to us mere mortals, I have to tell you.
Just to get back to the creative part, the bouncing ball. I remember reading about the bouncing ball, and the first time you showed that, people were actually looking to find the supercomputer generating those graphics. But my question is, when you, the team that actually created the machine, the first time you saw that with your own eyes, what your child could do, what was your reaction? I mean, our generation, we can understand what the bouncing ball means in that era. I mean, this generation cannot. But what was your reaction when you saw that?
Well, that's such a great question. Jeez.
Fabulous question.
That's an awesome question. All of it seemed magical beyond my wildest dreams at all times. Because in the first place, I'm this kid from the south side of Chicago. I don't know nothing. I've been invited to be part of this amazing thing, and I get plucked out of Chicago into this environment where I'm working with these genius level people, where the engineering juices were just astonishing. And later on, in later years, I got more involved in the business, and especially when the acquisition started and stuff like that, I was already doing the more high level stuff. But in the beginning, I was just this kid that joined the company and got to work with people like Dale Luck. I got to go to Jay Miner's house and get in his hot tub naked. It was like, it was, and it was in California. And, I grew up in Chicago. In California, like my mom warned me, she made this joke when I was leaving for California the last day. She said, "You be careful out there. Don't forget, California is the land of fruits and nuts," she said. And she turned out to be right. There's many fruity people and very many nutty people here in California. But gosh, I love it here. I've now lived here more than half of my life. But I was a Chicago kid, and all of this was magical to me. It was unbelievable. Every day, being with these people and being part of this opportunity where the promise was so great. I can't tell you. It was miraculous to me. It was beyond anything you could have dreamed of happening for yourself. And then, on top of all of that, then the hardware did all of that stuff. The hardware did those games and those early demos. And something I get to tell you here that I haven't said out loud yet, I get to tell you now, and I'm leaking some pleasant news. I'm cleaning my house, cleaning the warehouse, cleaning out my garage, cleaning. I came upon a tape that I have not yet come upon before, and I don't think it's out there yet. It's a tape of the original demos that we showed at the original CES. I have a copy of this tape that I'm about to get digitized, but I need someone who's like a stone cold expert that I could trust a VHS tape to from 1984. I need someone that I can totally trust to take this piece of gold out of my hands, because as far as I know, this is the only one in existence. But at some point, I remember us doing it. I don't remember the circumstances, but I knew we wanted a copy because I was that kind of person. I always wanted a quick little copy of stuff. We popped a tape in the drive and made a quick videotape of the demos that we showed at CES, that first launch, the first time we showed the Amiga at the CES. Do you know, is that out there? Does anyone know? David, do you know, is that stuff out there?
Don't believe so.
I don't think so. I mean, later demos are out there, but I don't think the original 1984 CES demos are out there. I think I'm the one who's got that tape, baby.
That's absolutely priceless.
RJ@mical.org. If you know, I need like the person that everyone is awestruck by. This person is someone you could totally trust to take this piece of gold from you and this precious material and translate it.
Well, you know who I'm thinking of? Amiga Bill Winters. You know, he's a professional videographer, and he's that's his whole life. You know, he's an award winner, isn't he? I think he won an Emmy recently.
He blew me off when I asked him.
You're joking. No, I don't believe you. Or is he afraid of it? Is he afraid of ruining it or something?
No, I only asked him lightheartedly, but he did blow me off lightheartedly.
Wow.
But I'll ask him again, perhaps. But it's really like an amazing little piece. But anyway, to finish my answer. I recently had a visitor from Holland come and stay with me for a short while, my friend Robert. And one of the things, one day we're in a lighthearted mood and we drove around, and he mentioned, since we were already kind of in that ballpark area, it would be fun to see the original Amiga building. And we did. We drove over there. It's still in the same place. That building's still in the same place. You can imagine. Someone else is living there now, but same place. And then we had the idea to drive around the back. The idea came originally because I had been a cigarette smoker when I lived in Chicago, right up until I moved to California. And it was one of the delightful things in my own personal story that I decided, instead of flying to California, that I would have them pack up all my stuff, but I'd keep my car and drive my car across America. I wanted to go from Chicago to California, and I was going to spend 2 weeks, do a little camping and relax and get my head together before I joined this new Amiga computer thing. And when I was a cigarette smoker, and one of the things when I was at the Rocky Mountain National Park in Colorado, I was sitting at the campfire, and this was Rocky Mountain. I was sitting at the campfire and thinking to myself that I'm going to California and I'm going to be the only cigarette smoker in this new Amiga computer company that I had joined. I'd found out during my interviews that no one else smoked cigarettes there, and I was going to be the only one. And I was sitting at my campfire smoking a cigarette thinking about this, and said to myself, maybe now's a good time to quit. Maybe I should quit. I've always wanted to, and I don't really care that much for smoking. Why don't I just quit? And I said to myself, sitting there next to that campfire, I am done. I am going to quit. When I'm done with this pack, I'm going to quit, I said. And I took another drag off my cigarette. and said to myself, gosh, how many times have you said that to yourself when you're done with this pack? When you're done with this pack? If you're going to quit, you should quit right now. If you're going to quit, you should quit right now. And so I did. I flicked my cigarette into the fire, and I took that pack out of my pocket and crushed it up, and I threw it into the fire, and I stopped smoking right then and there. But before that moment, I had thought about myself being the only smoker outside of Amiga, and I thought about myself skulking out behind the back door, out where the big rolling garage door was, smoking a cigarette out there by the dumpster, hiding from my fellow employees, my shame of being the only cigarette smoker in all of California. And I told Robert this story. Robert's a very nice person. He and I talked about a lot of interesting stuff. And I told him this story. And I decided I would show him that dumpster. I wanted to show him that dumpster. And when we got back there, I realized what it was really showing him, what he really wanted to see, what we were really back there to see. The Boing demo is awesome, the way the bouncing ball rotates, and it's all done with just simple color palette animation tricks. It's just a wonderful thing that we could pull it off. But what really makes that demo is the audio. It's this big
absolutely, yeah.
sound. And that big booming sound was created with a big foam rubber bat beaten against the big giant roller door that we had in the back of the building. And Robert and I stood there, and I took a picture of Robert in front of the big roller door at the back of the Amiga building. I don't think I've been back there since we left that area. I don't think I'd been back there since then. It was so nice to see that roller door again. But all of that, I mean, that's the sum of my answer. All of it was a miracle. Anything. You look at those demos that we took to Amiga, and there's one in there that you've probably never seen. I don't think it survived the original set of demos. There's this one little thing. One of the hardware people is a fellow named Glenn Keller, who is just such a wonderful, decent, kind, most superb human being, warm and loving, and the kind of person you always wish each of your teachers would be like Glenn. And Glenn taught me about wave dynamics and wave mechanics, because Glenn, just before Amiga, had been in Scotland and had been part of a team that was trying to harness wave energy into electricity. This is back early 80s. They were trying to build floats that had pieces in them that would be jiggled around by wave energy and would generate electricity. It's a cool thing that he did. And I got fascinated with it and asked him to teach me about it, just because, you know, if you know me, I'm always just fascinated by cool little stuff like this. I asked him to teach me what he had learned about wave dynamics. And so now he's at my house, at my apartment complex. We had a swimming pool in the apartment complex, and he's there for dinner one night. And the two of us are talking about waves. And he says, here, let me show you. And we take cookie sheets out to the swimming pool that's in the middle of my complex. And we're there with cookie sheets pushing against the water, making these waves that go to the other side and reflect. And he's showing me reflections do constructive and destructive. And look, this Glenn was just awesome. And there's a demo out there that is the stuff that I learned from Glenn. If you have like a, you know, the kind of wave that's just reflecting against a wall versus the kind of wave where it's a string that you're flipping and the end of the string is fixed against the wall, all these different things. And Glenn taught me all this different stuff. And there's this tiny little Amiga demo of a little sailboat bobbing on top of waves that are generated, that you can, you know, push buttons and generate them a little bit and make it flop around and stuff. And all of that stuff, I looked at all of that stuff. We had a very simple vector demo that you might have seen. That's just simply lines that are moving around the screen, and we're using flood fill to say where the lines are, fill in areas and simple color areas. And it's just this simple shaping triangles, shifting around as the thing moves around the screen, very fast, very simple colors. And it's it's just a beautiful little simple demo, but it points to the fact that the Amiga was going to do 3D, was going to do 3D surfaces, was going to have flat planar surfaces, and that we could render that sort of stuff. And you saw the demo, and to the untrained eye, you'd see the demo, and it was beautiful. It was just a pretty, gorgeous demo that was fast and smooth and had angular, polygon shapes, and was just nifty looking thing, and was impressive just by itself. But if you were an artist or a game designer that was thinking, how could I deploy this in a game? Oh, you would salivate when you saw that kind of power. Yep. So that's how I felt. When I saw it actually working, I salivated with the thought of that kind of power.
Since we're talking about demos, when Andy Warhol was in the first Amiga demo, were you in the crowd watching him using the paint bucket tool?
Actually, someone found me once in the crowd. There's a demo, there's a video of the launch. And at one point, the camera is the shot that's shown is one that's showing where the engineers are sitting in the audience. And I don't remember why, just because I was goofy. I wore white gloves. I wore white gloves to this event. And if you look at the grainy blow up of that section of the audience, you can see my white gloves clapping out there a little bit. It's a real grainy, almost you can't tell. But I know it's me because I was the only one wearing white gloves. So those have to be my hands.
I'll check it out.
But I was just in the audience with everyone else. We selected very few of us, the best spokespeople we had, and put them up on the stage and let them shine. And we just sat back and let the thing unfold. It was honor enough just to be there. I mean, I would have been surprised if they didn't invite us, but the truth is we all were on cloud nine. We couldn't believe this moment in life. My God, our baby was up there on stage. It was actually happening. And these people who we had worked and slaved with so closely, Bob Pariseau, Jack Hager, these all of the people that I'm leaving people out, don't forgive me, please, but it was like heavenly for us. It was transcendental for us. I don't remember talking or really thinking anything. I just remember being there and watching the whole thing unfold. Because again, one other thing, happily, people like Jack Hager, he knew what was going on because he had a part in the whole thing. The music people, the speech people, everyone had a part in the whole thing, and they knew, but we did not. And I was given a chance to review and said, no, thank you, because I wanted to be in the audience just listening. It was one of the pleasures I gave myself. I said, no, thanks. I was given a choice to whether or not I wanted to be part of the review committee for the launch. And no, I wanted to sit with everyone else out in the audience and be delighted. God, except I wore white gloves. So go find those grainy white gloves. You could hardly tell, but they're out there.
So now we know what influenced Michael Jackson.
Personally, when I read several of the stories about how the original Macintosh was introduced, and of course the book by Andy Hirschfeld, one of the hardware designers, Revolution in the Valley, very nice book. How they prepared the little machine for its official unveiling, where the machine actually spoke with a speech synthesizer. But when we put into perspective the presentation of the Amiga, the first official presentation, it really, from a technical point, from the actual performances there. From you didn't pull any stop, you didn't pull your punches there. I mean, this is something that I don't know. It was an unbelievable. You've got Andy Warhol there using the Amiga to create graphics. I mean, you got Andy Warhol. Come on. Unfortunately, the paint bucket didn't crash. You got the actual sound chip playing the introduction of Smoke on the Water in real time, actually playing the keys there, and all the animations. I mean, come on. I'm a huge Macintosh fan. But come on.
You're a huge Mac fan?
Sorry?
You are a huge Mac fan?
Macintosh, yeah. But
yes, me too. I am too. To this day, I'm still a huge Macintosh fan.
I think from a hardware point, it took Apple the Quadra AV series with a DSP chip and all the video inputs, outputs in 96 to match what the Amiga had probably 10 years before that. And again, System 7, it was the operating system then, was no match. I mean, was no match to the Amiga operating system of the late 1980s. I mean,
it wasn't until they finally switched over to Unix that they finally had a chance of being the Amiga's equal.
Yeah, well, that's not next. Actually, that's the descendant of Next Step, and it was amazing. Actually, it was amazing what you had there. I mean, even Acorn and Archimedes, it took a RISC processor, the ARM we use today, to be able to use one processor and the subsystems to kind of equal the Amiga. And if we're talking about, I took almost a 2 or 3 years hiatus from computers when I was finishing high school. So I wasn't interested in computers, just being a normal teenager and something like that. So when I came back in 1993-94, everybody was raving about multimedia, and I was like, wow, what's that multimedia? And when I saw this, everyone was talking about, I said, we had that with the Amiga, I think 6 or 7 years. Why is that new? Why is that new? And they say, we've got a monitor displaying 256 colors on screen at the same time. I said, well, the Amiga could do 4096 using hold and modify mode. I mean, in 85. So what's you know where I'm getting that?
Yes.
And then somebody showed me amazing graphics and animations on a high-end PC on 94. We just launched Shadow of the Beast on the Amiga. It really kicked them in the balls. Shadow of the Beast. What an amazing beast that was.
What an amazing beast.
Yeah. All this, I think it had 32 levels of parallax scrolling, all that incredible animation, the sound effects. I mean, come on. It really pushed your machine to its limits and then some.
That was Psygnosis, of course.
Yeah, exactly.
Excellent company, excellent people.
Exactly. I mean, Shadow of the Beast, I remember Shadow of the Beast being one of the benchmarks on what the Amiga could really do with its own hardware. I mean, it really pushed. And it took the PC industry more than a decade. I mean, it took them mid-90s with all these 2D graphics cards to catch up to what the Amiga could do in the mid-80s, which was so far beyond what it could do.
It's interesting. The machine had such huge potential, could have gone who knows where. It didn't. It didn't happen, and other forces prevailed. IBM, probably stronger force against the Amiga than the Macintosh was finally. mostly because the IBM simply ignored the Amiga and didn't even worry about it, and they kind of, I don't know, but it's, for me, it's a fun thing for me to imagine what might have happened instead if things had gone just a little bit differently, even just a couple of months earlier or a couple of months stronger or something. And instead of Apple ending up with the dominant position that it had, if the Amiga had ruled instead, what kind of world would we have now? The Apple ended up holding on to a piece of the marketplace where it was a niche group of engineers that wanted that kind of machine because it had specific, art, specific video, was more expensive, was, it had a lot of things going against it. Didn't have the real popular business software in the beginning, and finally didn't really ever have it compared with, IBM users. And there was a lot of momentum against it. What if instead of IBM facing the lame Macintosh as a competitor, what would have happened to our world if Microsoft had to face the Amiga as its competitor, and where instead of Microsoft and Windows being dragged into our world a decade later, what if they were dragged into our world a decade earlier? Where would we be today in terms of hardware, software, user interface capabilities? If the Amiga had won, I like to imagine.
RJ, this is my opinion, of course. I'm not sure anybody else would agree with me. But Commodore at senior level was notorious for never wanting to negotiate or talk with people like Microsoft or any of the higher-end software companies. They did not want to talk with them. They didn't. They just refused to collaborate. And for me, that is the killer blow. If you don't collaborate, you're on your own. That's where you end up, on your own. I mean, one of my strengths in the UK was that I established a great relationship with the software games developers, and we got development kits into them. For example, for the CD32, they're all working under non-disclosure agreements, writing software for the CD32, so that on the day when we were supposed to have launched it, we'd have had software already for it. That's what I think building a business is all about. But for some reason, Commodore senior level, they would never negotiate with anybody else. And look at all the companies who provided peripherals for them. They wouldn't negotiate. Instead, they made them their enemy. Instead of saying, let's work together,
I simply don't understand that. I'm just...
A possible what-if scenario maybe would have been, and this is not so much far-fetched, if Tramiel never had left Commodore and he stayed there, because he had a vision. He had a vision of his machines. Maybe if Tramiel had stayed there, he could have understood the potential of the machines and really pushed behind them. Of course, he made huge mistakes later on with the Atari ST, with the Falcon, with the Jaguar, with everything. But
more than that, I don't mean to be negative, but I get to, because I've seen it too many times in my life, and so fuck you, I get to be negative. Sorry. But though there have been actors in our world who were not good people, and who were not just accidentally caught in bad situations, but who actively were not good business people, who screwed people out of and who did bad business practices and damaged people and hurt reputations, hurt relationships and stuff like that. And there was a lot of people like that in our world. We were not those people. We never were those kinds of people. And a lot of those people who were trying to acquire the Amiga away from us were doing it not because they loved us, not because they loved the Amiga, not because they loved you, but because they wanted to whack Commodore, because they wanted to do something mean and vicious. And sorry, but fuck you. We did not design the machine for that. We designed the machine to be a good thing. That even though, I'm not naive. I know that so instead of Atari winning that war, Commodore, not that war, but maybe that war, but that battle, that it's just big business and stuff. But still, Commodore at least tried to stroke that side of us that we were trying to do something noble and kind and decent, and we were trying to do the right thing for the world. And Atari, in the end of their negotiations with Amiga Computer, finally by the end they had made it abundantly clear that they had zero interest in the people, zero interest in any future, zero interest in my brother Ron or you or any other consumer that we were trying to help with our machine. They didn't care about any of that stuff. They just wanted to hit Commodore across the forehead with a 2x4, and the 2x4 was named Amiga Computer, and I'm glad they didn't get a chance to do that.
Yes, it's a very nice story.
Sorry for the bad language. I'm really sorry.
No worries. We'll leave that out. But there is a funny story on the first time the Tramiels went to Atari after they acquired it. Somebody put on the speakers music from Star Wars, The Empire, said, "The Empire has entered the base." And of course, we many of us have read the story of how at the last moment you gave Sam Tramiel the check so that Commodore, so you could get the rights of the Amiga back. And Jack Tramiel, of course, then said, if somebody gives you check for $500,000, you rush to the bank to cash it out. I'm quite sure he regretted that decision.
I'd like to make a comment about this little bit of conversation. Yeah. I honestly, I did not know Jack Tramiel. I joined Commodore in June of 1983. I saw Jack Tramiel for about 2 minutes at the Winter CES in January of 94 on the stand there, and he was shouting at all the employees. That's my sole experience with Jack, which is sad, but that's just way of life. But what I can say is that I don't think it would have made any difference if Jack Tramiel had stayed at Commodore, because Commodore's problems, which ultimately created their demise, is that they never had a business plan of any kind, nothing. And Jack Tramiel, I think Jack got very lucky, because the fact that he couldn't get the chips for his calculators, he ended up getting a chip factory, and then that all fell into place. And then with the VIC-20 and the 64, he struck gold. But the fact
but forget about Jack. I don't care about Jack right now. Go back to Commodore. Yeah. So you think even if he had stayed, Commodore was doomed?
Yeah. Yes, absolutely.
Wow. That's huge, man.
I really do. Because they never had a business plan of any kind, which is like number one bad thing if you're establishing a business and running a business. But the second thing is that they never did any external auditing. So what was happening is that all of these general managers or managing directors, whatever their title was, in all the subsidiaries around the world, was reporting all their figures, and they weren't true. So Commodore never actually knew its true financial position. Now, let me give you one example of that, right? I went to the States. I went to Commodore Inc. in January of 1992, and I found out that we weren't selling anything to anybody, and I couldn't understand why. So I first thing I did was I go and visit some of these accounts. And the first one was that happened to be Sears, one of our biggest accounts, and they hadn't paid their bill. So I go up and meet up with them, and I said, "Gentlemen, would you tell me why you're not paying your bill?" And they said, "Oh, that's because we're waiting for you to take all our stock back." And I thought for myself, I said, "Well, I've been a Commodore, I think at that time it was about 9 years. And I said, well, I've never known Commodore to be a lending library. At which point in time, they pushed a piece of paper across the desk to me, and it was signed by Jim Dion, who was the president of Commodore Inc., the sales company, and it was a sale or return agreement. And they had filled Sears stores up to the gunnels with a product that nobody could sell, no matter who they were, let alone Sears. They'd done a sale or return agreement for CD TVs.
Yeah.
Now, can you imagine Sears selling a CD TV? Now, get real. So what I'm saying is that Jim Dion had recorded sales of all of these CD TVs, put it in his figures, got paid for it, got his commission and his bonus, but we never got the money because it never was a true sale, and Commodore didn't know. That's just one example. There's loads and loads more. So those are the reasons I think that Commodore was destined to bankruptcy, because they were out of control.
Although I don't know the details about CDTV, I would know about, the intimate details like that, but that's just so depressing on such a large scale.
Mm. Well, sadly, but
I'm sad you had to live through that. David, it's like, the story I get to tell is the light side of the story, and you always have to tell the dark side of the story. I'm so sorry for that.
We'll return to the bright side.
Yeah, yeah, but at the end of the day, I mean, I was there 12 and a half years, and I loved every second of it. Don't get me wrong, but I'm a realist, and I knew, because I was recruited to when I joined Commodore, I was recruited for one specific role. My role was to sell Commodore Pets, which was their business product, into the retail market. I was recruited to do that job. I was there a few weeks, and I got told, companies realized it's not going to anywhere near enough product to supply a new market. So therefore, my job was redundant within a few weeks of me being there. So I knew then they hadn't got a business plan. Luckily for me, the 64 was taking off like crazy. They needed somebody to handle the major retail accounts. That was my background. So I got that role, and the rest is history. But I knew then, if you haven't got a business plan, I was there all those years. And if you look at the records for Commodore UK, we were selling everything in big numbers. And they never once ever came and said, what do you need? What product should we develop? What price point do you need to meet? What features does it have to have? Never once did they ever do that. Now, I don't know, as far as I'm concerned, the technical company of that nature, you've got to know what the market wants. You've got to at least ask the question. They never did. It's bizarre, isn't it?
They never asked.
Nope. Never. So suddenly what would happen is I got 10,000 plus fours lobbed into my warehouse. Sell these for £300. Well, nobody ever asked for it. It was as much use as a chocolate bloody teacup. It's ridiculous. The products that he come up with that had no place in anybody's lineup of products. It didn't belong anywhere. It was in no man's land. But they produced them, manufactured them, but nobody ever asked for it.
That's funny. Okay, listen, I got to go. I'm way over time, but I'm going to add one quick black and white or a 0 versus 1 response to that. When we made the Amiga, we didn't ask anyone's opinion. We just did that thing. We just did it. When we did the Atari Lynx, the handheld color game system, and we designed the shell for it, we did ask consumers, and consumers said to us, well, here's the little one, but the little one feels like a flimsy piece of crap. But that big one feels like I'm really getting something for my money. So we built a big one. It was a big one where the machine is a little one, but the case was a big one. And we packed the case with dead D batteries that we were able to buy in Taiwan, where we hot melt glued dead D batteries inside the case to give it size and weight that consumers told us. And the original Lynx was this huge beast that had size and weight, and consumers held it in their hands and said, this is fucked up. Get rid of this. This is horrible. It's huge. Make me something small. It's heavy. Make me something light. Oh my God, you jerks. Oh, you jerks. And when Atari acquired the device, the second version that they brought out was very small, and very lightweight. And the truth is that they took out the dead D batteries that we had hot melt glued in there, and they made the case smaller, and that's all they did. To finish the point I made earlier, part of the reason why the Atari Lynx failed, whereas the thing that we were building would not have failed, the handheld game system that we were building would not have failed, because we would have brought it out at a lower cost, and we would have had it down to below $100, $99.99 within a half a year, because of our good relationships that we had with all of these hardware manufacturers in Taiwan and elsewhere in China. We had wonderful, wonderful relationships with people there, and we were taking advantage of them, where we had been good people over all of the years, and they had respected that, and now we needed them to give us back, and they were doing it. Meanwhile, with all the software developers around the planet, RJ was going out there saying, it was Dave Needle going to Hardware Land and saying, and Rick Rice and RJ, and my team of people and the software people were just loving it and believing it. If we had done it, it would have been low cost. It would have been below $100 within 6 months. We would have had a library of software that would have just been singing. Mm-hmm. But instead, the bad guys got it, and the bad guys got it who had relationships with Taiwan and with China where they had screwed them before. And so now Taiwan and China said, well, yeah, we'll sell you those screws, but they're going to cost twice as much, and you have to pay cash up front.
Absolutely, yeah.
And the software developers fled in droves. They just wouldn't do it because they, if not them, their friends. And I personally have friends that had been screwed by those people, screwed out of money. I have one friend, just as an example, and when he finally demanded payment and finally did get payment, he was given payment in a check that was issued to a bank in a different country, where it took an additional 3.5 weeks for the funds to be processed through this bank in a different country. And it was just like stuff like that over and over and over again. And it screwed them. Being bad people came back and bit them. Yeah. I bet the Lynx would have changed the industry if the right people had been able to bring it to market.
If I may ask one final question, do you think, what you created initially was so far ahead of its time? Every other single product we've got in the market is actually an evolution, not a revolution. Even if we go to the Silicon Graphics workstations, if we go to the PlayStation 3, which was a major leap after PlayStation 2, the iPhone, the iPad, everything can be seen as an evolutionary product, not a revolutionary. I think the Amiga was the first truly revolutionary product. Do you think that in our lifetime, we might see another revolutionary product like the Amiga? Computer-wise, of course.
So, David, would you like to go first?
Well, I think we were coming close to it with Ombre, what Commodore was developing with Ombre. That was a phenomenal step forward. And I had it demonstrated to me in the process when Colin Proudfoot and I were, hoping to manage and buy it to Commodore, and part of our due diligence. So Dr. Ed Hepler showed it to me, cobbled together with software, and it was absolutely mind-blowing. And I have not seen anything since that even comes close to it. So my opinion is, if that could have been done then, and the crazy thing is that ESCOM didn't even bother to look at it, for God's sake, I think, yes, there can be a revolutionary product. And people are working on today. And I think I think there's going to be a major step forward probably in the next 12, 15 months, maybe. I think there'll be some major step forwards because research is going on and we are developing, completely fresh ideas that nobody ever thought about before. So, yeah, I absolutely think there could be. I hope I don't think I will be, but I'm hoping I'm around to see it.
I'm sure you and I will be around to see it because I'm sure the next big one's not more than a few years off. I mean, we've seen it over and over again. Every few years, something else. Oh my God, look. Oh my God, look. Oh my God, look. It's over and over. And it's like nonstop. It's just nonstop.
Well, this not really is a plug for my books, but, I'm in the middle of a trilogy of books called From Vultures to Vampires, which tells a story of what happened to Commodore's IPs, assets, patents, and logos after the bankruptcy. And some of the products that were being developed based around the Amiga technology, that if any one of them actually come to market would have changed the face of Amiga forever. It's an absolutely amazing story. And the fact that we've got 3 volumes, which the 3rd volume is definitely the last. We're finishing here in 2023. But, honestly, some of the products that most people don't even know were being developed, it's mind-boggling. So, I'm fully convinced that there will be some new technology coming soon.
Hopefully. Mr. Mical, personally...
My answer.
Personally...
No, wait, I got an answer to that question.
Yeah.
My answer is simple. Hold your thought. You can ask that in a second, but... So, we made the Amiga computer decades ago, and it was not a sophisticated group of highly trained engineers who created a thing, but it was a ragtag group of wild-haired people that got together and made a computer. And it happened like in the fairy tales. It happened, in like the Hollywood stories about how stuff happened, except it actually really did happen. And then it took decades, but we have slid away from that and slid toward a world where such a thing was no longer thinkable, but you needed committees and groups of, hundreds working on just the DSP of the new hardware and it became big business and big stuff. And it seemed, oh my God, those days of innocent glory of individuals being able to make a difference, all of those days were gone. Well. And cell phones happened, slowly upon us, and cell phones were originally just phones and then text and then some simple graphics and then better graphics. And then suddenly cell phones could do games. And suddenly, without warning, it was possible for a person or 2 people or 3 people in a garage to create a game that made $1 million. And it happened again. And it wasn't a big committee. And it wasn't hundreds of people doing this and hundreds of people doing that. But it was, me and you, and we grab a musician and make some beeps and boops or something. And it's a cycle that comes and goes. I'm not afraid. I think that we should all continue to try to be individuals and try to make our individual magic happen at all times with the energy that we're given.
Yeah, I guess go back to the cottage industry days.
Cottage industry days. I love that thought, don't you?
Yeah, absolutely. Because I mean, the games industry was exactly that. People in bedrooms writing games and making money. And nowadays, they've all been bought by big companies, and everybody's now is just a number. There's no individuality, no people involved, no transformative individual enthralling people, characters like RJ. They exist, but nobody knows who they are because they're just a number on a bloody balance sheet.
Yeah. And in the beginning, Amiga was 1 people, 2, 3 people, 5 people, 10 people. But even at the end, when it was fully grown and enough to sell to Commodore. It was only 35 people. It was only 35 people for everything, the hardware, the software, the business, the sales, the people that were still selling joysticks and joy boards. I mean, they were all still out there.
Yeah.
35 people.
And one dog.
That we sold to Commodore.
Right. But what these 35 people did, and one dog, if I'm correct, you had a dog consulting as well.
And one dog.
Yeah,
That's what you said. And one dog.
Yeah, Jay's dog, isn't it? Oh, yeah.
Oh my God. And one dog, Mitchie.
Yeah.
Who was Jay's dog and was a wonderful dog, except a little known fact about Mitchie. I don't know that I've ever said this out loud before. It just occurred to me to say, but I'm going to say it here. Mitchie was a little bit mangy. Mitchie had a little bit of, skin troubles and fur coming out a little bit and red spots on Mitchie's skin. Just a little bit, but.
So it's Itchy Mitchie.
Itchy Mitchie. And part of loving Mitchie correctly was not only loving Mitchie, but fastidiously avoiding the itchy spots and not making Mitchie uncomfortable.
That is so,
I would have never said that while Jay was still alive.
That is so graphically visual.
Just a little bit. Gosh.
Oh dear. Bless.
But then, so do I.
Oh dear. Lovely.
All right, listen, I gotta go. On that note,
thank you for your time. Thank you for being here. Also, personally, thank you for all the inspiration you gave us on the Amiga. You really created the core technologies we grew up with. And as a small museum run by two childhood friends, we really appreciate your work. We will make everything possible to all the visitors, to all the generations, to really understand that what the Amiga was about is not just a machine. It was the most incredible machine. And what I said about the analogy with the PlayStation is a modest estimate. Thank you for that. Thank you.
All right, so here's one back at you. For you, hopefully that you will understand. You ask me to understand, how I have influenced you, how I've influenced other people in the community, in the world, and I know that. I truly know that. I've received so many wonderful, communications from people over the years explaining, such how wonderful the influence was that we had. But the thing that I kind of hope that I'm communicating through all of this is, what everyone did for me, how not you currently, presently, everyone that are saying thank you, which I truly love, but back young me who thought this day might come, young me who's always been so happy at the thought of the thing that we were doing might help humanity in this way. I've always been a happy fellow based on partly on the fact that this would happen someday, and it, something else might have happened. I might have died early or something like that, but that doesn't change the fact that back then I was joyous with the thought that the influence that of the thing that we created would be as good as people like you are expressing, and you, David, and anyone else that might listen to this tape someday. Made me happy. I am the rich and full, and I feel myself as the wonderful person that I feel myself to be, thanks to you.
Thank you.
I'd like to say something. I'll add to that. you know, at this moment in time, 2023, the Commodore and particularly the Amiga community is vast and it's growing, but I think it's all down because what happened was that your personal spirit, J Miners and all the other people involved, it's your spirit that's inside the Amiga, and it's what keeps the Amiga alive. We all feel, we still today get generous amounts of love from this product because it's got your love in it. And I'm not just saying that because you're here. I absolutely mean it.
I hear you. God, wouldn't that be lovely? What a thing. If you can imagine that, you know, some magical thing happened, that group of people with that kind of spirit birth a thing and a seed that's helped and it's just a lovely thing to think about, isn't it? That such a thing happened in our lives, in our civilization.
It's
Yay!
true. It's true, RJ. It's true. It's
God, it's
absolutely
wonderful. True. Somebody ought to write a book about this, David.
God love you, RJ. You're one of a kind, man, and God bless you.
You too. Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Talk with you soon. I gotta run. I'm real late. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks again.
Bye.
Mr. Pleasance, we can talk again, and thank you for your presence here tonight.
Yeah, I hope I didn't interfere too much. I just couldn't stop myself. You know.
So we can talk about doing something either end of the month or early in March. Please give me time.
Yeah, you got contact with me now. So my email is info@cbmamiga.com. It's easy to remember. Email me anytime or get me on Facebook.
Right.
Be glad to get involved in anything.
Yes.
And I've got a brand new project that I'm just in the middle of launching, which I think your audience will love. This is a continuation of this whole conversation we just had tonight. I'm trying to bring together the whole community around the world under one umbrella. So it's a big project, and I'm looking forward to announcing it all. I'm just in the middle of preparing a Kickstarter for it. So,
may I ask, are you located in UK or in
yes, UK?
UK. Oh, that's great. That's great.
But I do spend time in the States as well. Usually over Christmas time, and that I've got family in Miami, and I like the warmer weather over Christmas. But
okay,
yeah. But I'm easily available, and I travel a lot to attend any Amiga event around the world. I'm happy to travel. You know, I mean, last September, I was in Italy for Passione Amiga magazine open day. October, I was at Amiga 37 in Germany. December, I was in Toronto at the World of Commodore show. So I go anywhere I'm invited, and happy to meet with the people. So keep that in mind if you're having any events coming up.
Yes. Well, actually, we've got a couple of ideas, but we'll work on them and come back to you because we'd love to bring you over here. Cyprus.
Yeah, and I love Cyprus, to be honest with you. I really do. I'm not just saying that. When I was at Commodore Electronics Limited in Switzerland, I looked after 35 countries. And many of the countries, if I wanted to hold a distributor meeting, there was a lot of countries they wouldn't go to. But Cyprus is one that they all happy to go to. So I had a couple of distributor meetings there, and lovely. I was there with my sons too. We went to Paphos for a holiday, I don't know, about 4 or 5 years ago. I love it. It's very nice. And I love your food.
That's nice. So we'll...
stay in touch, yeah?
All right.
Fantastic. Nicholas, nice to have met you.
Nice to have met you too. It was a pleasure.
Good. Thank you so much for inviting me. I appreciate it. It's been a lot of fun.
Thank you
for your time.
Yeah, thank you indeed. Yes, be in touch. Yeah,
of course. Have a good afternoon. Have a good night, and catch you up soon.
Thank you so much. Cheers, guys.
See you soon. Bye.
Bye.